Well, thank you so much, Carl. Thanks everybody for coming this morning. Well, it's morning for me. My name is Dale Langsford. I am a lecturer at the Wits School of Education, which is in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm also a member of the Wits LCT Hub. And today I'm going to speak about how LCT tools can be used to strategize interventions, to encourage students to engage with various aspects of their practice, maybe when things aren't going quite as well as you'd hope they are going. So I'm talking, the title we've said is No Knowers Left Behind, a kind of a play on no people or learners left behind. To bring the whole group of students, whatever the practice is, along with you as you improve their practice. Now, the big problem that I'm going to speak about today that isn't actually only a problem in teacher education, which is my field, is when you as a lecturer, a teacher, a mentor, see this gap in students' practice that is important to fill, and you design this fabulous intervention, and you're so excited this is going to really support their learning, and then they don't use it. And I found this cartoon that says, the little kid says to the teacher, you can feel good knowing your intervention put up a good fight. They are, the students we find can be resistant to interventions that help their learning. And this can make you feel disheartened and frustrated within your role as a lecturer, an academic, whatever it is, as a supervisor. So I'm going to say that these kinds of frustrations happen in all practices, but today I'm going to actually exemplify how those frustrations played out and how we kind of overcame them with final year Bachelor of Education students here at the Wits School of Education in what I'm calling a tale of two interventions. The organizing logic of this roundtable is kind of a timeline of the particular case. So I start with the initial problem that prompted the development of a reflection intervention, and then show how semantics was used to develop a set of prompting questions that were to encourage student teachers to bring theoretical knowledge to bear on their contextually bound experiences of classroom life. And I'll note that the uptake was pretty good of this guidance, but students needed a little more encouragement. So then I'm going to show how we developed the next intervention using specialization that was used with the new revised semantics and reflection prompts. And I'm going to show you some examples of how students' reflection really improved and the kind of uptake that we experienced. So the year is 2019, and student teachers at the Wits School of Education are required to write reflections on their observations and experiences of teaching when they are in school-based practicum learning. In South African teacher education, all student teachers, whether they are doing a 4-year teaching degree or a 1-year cap on a pure sciences or arts degree, they have to spend time in real life classroom situations. And part of that is they should keep a reflective journal where they talk about their experiences to make sense of them. Now, the purpose of doing these reflections is not simply for them to, like in a mirror, just describe what they see. Rather, it should enable articulations between their university coursework, the concepts they learn, and this particular classroom context in which they find themselves. So at the Wits School of Education, just to give you some context, to help students write these reflections when they are on school-based practicum, we gave them these prompts. How did your lesson or lessons go? What worked well? What didn't work well? What would you do differently next time? The problem, though, that we have found was that the reflection prompts promoted descriptions of what happened in that classroom without that articulation from university-based coursework. So it was this kind of snake that was eating its tail. So to understand why this was a problem, I'm going to jump to the semantics dimension of legitimation code theory. Now, the semantics dimension helps us to analyze how abstract and how complex a practice is. And it has two analytical concepts. First, it has relative strengths of semantic gravity, which give how context-based or abstract something is. And so the weaker the semantic gravity, the more tied to a context it is. In this case, it would be the specific classroom that the student teachers are in. And the stronger the semantic gravity, the more abstract it kind of is. And relative strengths of the semantic density show how complex it is. So if the semantic density is weaker, the practice is simpler, and if it's stronger, it's more complex. Relative strengths of semantic gravity and semantic density set up these four codes. The rarefied code, where practices are abstract and simple. The rhizomatic code, where practices are abstract and complex. The prosaic code, where practices are context-bound and simple. And the worldly code, where the practices are context-bound and complex. So with that established, a translation device for analyzing the relative strengths of what semantic gravity and semantic density look like in student-teacher reflections, will help us to understand what the problem is. So I'm proposing this translation device for semantic gravity for this case. So when the semantic gravity is very strong at the bottom of the semantic plane, the student teachers are referring to specific events in the specific classroom or school that they find themselves in when they're writing their reflection. When it's still relatively strong but a little bit weaker, they make general observations about teaching. When it's relatively weak but not super weak, they propose or draw on tips for practice. And when it's very weak at the top of the semantic plane, they are drawing on principles or theories of practice that operate outside of a particular teaching context. So it's quite abstract. Okay.
So can I just ask, just to go back?
Of course.
So we got like specific events in a particular classroom or school. So concrete, particular, very bound in time and place. Yeah. So general observations about what was going on in that classroom and school?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
Right. So then tips and techniques for practice beyond that context of time and place.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
No, I was just want to check that that's why, like, what could look like it's a bit confusing as to the strengths, but that's why it goes higher and higher. Okay.
Yes. Yes. So let's look at a translation device for semantic density. And I know that my translation devices don't look like some of them that you'd see in the literature in a table form. I'm being creative today, so I've put it straight on the plane. So when semantic density is very weak on the very far left-hand side of the semantic plane, the student teachers are offering discrete, kind of disconnected explanations, a little bit stronger. They're still discrete, but they're describing, they're giving a little bit more information. A little bit stronger,
Hang on, can you
those.
go through why would explanations be simpler than descriptions?
So that's a very good question. Thanks, Carl. So an explanation is kind of just um, this happened, that happened. Okay. Whereas to me, a description, there's a little bit, something a little bit richer about it, a little more.
I think you're going to need different words because
I think you're right.
you just
I think
described
you're right. You
description basically. You just said description as far as I'm concerned. An explanation would have a
okay.
description plus an explanation of that description, which would be stronger semantic density for me.
Thank
So
you.
I think what we've
That's
got
helpful.
here is, yeah, but rather than, I mean, Steve said why they're the wrong way around. If there is any potential for confusion, it might just be worth having using different words. So, but I would have descriptions as, in my mind, descriptions are just a description of what happens. An explanation has to have the description in order to then explain it, which means it's adding something, which
I
sounds to
think
me
you're
more
actually correct.
complex.
I think you're correct. It made
But yeah,
sense in my
Penny's like,
mind, but actually,
people just jump in, please, rather than do the
Yeah,
chat.
if
But
yeah.
like, I'm going to say for now,
if it,
Penny's just said you could have like
if
articulation or something and description analysis.
Mm.
Well, hang on, no, I wouldn't say description analysis either. I wouldn't
what
use
might
those
be
words
helpful
either.
is to look at the genre, the different kinds of genres from SFL, and you can see, right, according to the different ones as they sort of spiral up. Description is towards it comes before explanation because of what Carl said. In order to explain something, you probably have to describe it. It might be useful going back to this my supervisor Caroline Coffin's work, and to look at the different genres that might help you to guide the different
Thank you.
genres.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I think
Daniel.
the really, really simple thing to do is just to note that I misunderstood it compared to what you
Mm.
meant. But your description sounds perfectly fine. Your the way you described it sounds perfectly fine, but as when you're using those words, I'm like, oh no. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's that whole what I'm pitching is not what people are catching. um, so thank you. That's very helpful. So then as it gets a little bit, the semantic density gets stronger, the students are bringing these they're bringing, they, the ideas are connected, but um, as opposed to discrete. So,
By the way, Dale, that's why we have those tables.
yep.
Can't get
It was in a
no
table.
confusions then.
It was in a table. So,
I just
so
say
here's the
that
problem.
fact
Sorry.
of looking at other things to tell you what makes sense of an order. I mean, Bloom's taxonomy goes the other way, but going from single to relational, that's kind of solo taxonomy as well. So it might be worth looking at those.
That's correct. Yes. That's kind of where that came from. Yes. Thanks, Paul. So the problem is that the reflection prompts that student teachers that they had set them up to hardly move out of this prosaic code. And as a result, only
Are those the
6% of
questions they were
students,
asked, by the way?
yes.
Yeah, just like how did it go?
Um,
What worked well? What
how did
didn't?
it go? What worked? Yeah. Only 6% referred to anything outside of the classroom at all. So this was the first problem. So here's an example that I'm going to go very, very quickly. A typical student response looked like this. Supervising teacher wasn't at school, reported to the deputy. I was all by myself. So very discreet, sort of what's happening in the class. Some lessons are more enjoyable because I taught them last year. A little bit less within the context, but still within this context of teaching, and goes into the rarefied for a very kind of abstract, it seems very random because this abstract idea isn't connected to anything else, right? So using the semantics dimension, Lee Risniak and Elizabeth Walton revised the reflection prompts to these 4 prompts. What concepts or theories help me to understand the incidents that happen in the lesson? How's my conceptual knowledge extended by what happened here or challenged? what aspects of teaching and learning in this context require further research, and what did I learn when reflecting on this lesson in relation to previous lessons and future lessons. So I'm just going to take the first two prompts. You can see how they operate differently in two ways. Firstly, they get students to be working in different codes, but also to shift between those codes. So the first is taking theory to bear on practice, and the second, practice to bear on theory. So it's encouraging those movements across the plane.
Oh, thanks.
So the same student, when using the revised prompts in their next teaching practicum, look at how they move around the plane now. They really move beyond just describing this context in simple, discrete ways, and they started linking with theory, considering more complex issues within this particular classroom context, a far cry from what they wrote before. So I'm going to move a little bit quickly, but we can always go back and discuss. So that was great, except now 66% of the students took up the guidelines, but that means that 33% still did not. So a third of the students were still resistant to the intervention, which became our second problem. So at this point, we had used LCT's semantics dimension to overcome this theory-practice divide issue. But we needed something else, something to get student teachers to understand how their reflections were often inadequate, how they could be made better. And so to do this, we turned to the specialization dimension to help students and get them to see why their reflections have or lack depth, and to give them an imagination for what a powerful reflection could look like. So I'm going to take you into what we did then. So the second intervention took the form of an assignment that all final year students at the Wits School of Education undertook. Now, in South African teacher education policy, there's provision for some credits of the program, very small amount of credits, to be taught at a postgraduate level. So even though it's an undergraduate degree, you can push just a few credits to postgraduate level and introduce a research project. So that was done in our course, which is a core course that all of the fourth year students take. And so we chose to use specialization because the student teachers at the Wits School of Education have actually been working with both specialization and semantics in some form or another all the way through their 4 years to that point of their degree, as they develop as knowers. So the student numbers were quite high. We had between 480 and 750 students a year. And importantly, this assignment was completed before they went on their very last teaching practical, so that they were armed with tools to develop deep, powerful reflections. I'm going to take you through what they did over the 3 years very briefly. So over the 3 years, the intervention has taken slightly different forms. The assignment has taken slightly different forms, mainly for logistical reasons, so students don't copy from their friends the year before. But in all 3 years, they had to choose a reflection from their reflective journal from previous teaching practicals, code it using the translation device that I'm going to show you next, and plot it on the specialization plane. And sometimes they wrote an analytical essay talking about how they used insights from their coursework and analysis to suggest how to improve their reflection, or what the analysis showed them about their original reflection, and then in 2024 and this year, they had to rewrite their reflection using those insights to make it better. So for this task, we gave them the translation device. They didn't have to develop it themselves. And specialization, we taught this to them in a series of about 8 lectures where they learned all sorts of things about specialization and how to use it to analyze all sorts of things, assessment tasks, lessons, subjects. And then the assignment was the culmination where we gave them these translation devices and the assignment. So the specialization dimension has 2 concepts, which are epistemic relations and social relations. Relative strengths of epistemic relations give how much specific knowledge matters for success in a particular practice. So to analyze their reflections, we gave them this translation device for epistemic relations. So when the epistemic relations are very weak at the bottom, they don't really talk about knowledge or procedures at all. When the epistemic relations are still relatively weak, but a little stronger, they mention knowledge or procedure, but they're not specific about it. When the epistemic relations are a little bit stronger, they use the theoretical insights or strategies without mentioning exactly what knowledge or how they use the concept. And when it's very strong, they are very specific about, I was teaching proper fractions where the denominator is bigger than the numerator, very, very specific concepts. Then the relative strengths of social relations give how much particular ways of being, dispositions, and patterns of cognition matter for success in a particular practice. So to analyze their reflections, we gave them this translation device. So when the social relations are very weak at the left-hand side, they simply say what was done in the lesson. Okay. When they're a little bit stronger, the students describe kind of the process that they followed. When they are relatively strong, the social relations, they include the interpretation, their discretion, their perceptions, their intentions. And when they are very, very strong, the students refer to personal identities, emotions, and so on. In fact, what I did to help my students in my small tutorial class to understand, because they struggled a little bit with the social relations, I said, imagine you yourself. So Dale is standing at the end of the right-hand side of this translation device. So the closer it is to me, the closer what I'm saying depends on who I am, the stronger the social relations. The further away, anybody could have made that observation or said that thing about the lesson. So they found that quite helpful, and it was quite sweet. They, when they draw it, they draw a little stick figure at the end to remind themselves of that.
Dale?
Yes.
Could I
Daniel.
Yeah, so I understand that with the semantic sort of intervention, you had 33, I think, something like that, % that did not actually implement what you had done in the intervention. And then you decided that maybe through looking at ER and SR that you'd be able to do what? Like I'm trying to understand what you were looking to do with this specific tool. Raise awareness of what specifically, or help them pick what?
Okay, so I will speak about it a bit later, but let me give you a little TLDR. So we wanted them to see what we meant when we said depth of reflection, that you are not just describing, but you are drawing on and bringing together the specific knowledge that you're teaching, the specific concepts from your coursework that you are drawing on and that are informing the decisions that you're making, the places in which your own self, your emotion, your identities drive the decisions that you make. But thank you for that question, because I don't think I made it clear enough in the beginning, and also importantly, that they then get an imagination for what reflections could look like as well, beyond description, which I'll show you a little bit later. Does that help?
Right. So from what I'm understanding is that the whole idea is to get them out of the just this is what happened, and you're taking another angle through specialization and saying maybe if I kind of attack it through that, since semantics didn't seem to cut it, is that what's happening?
That's exactly it. But importantly, as you'll also see, the semantics intervention didn't fall away. They still used those same prompts.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in 2023, the assignment started with them analyzing. They had to choose one of those 4 revised reflection prompts and describe and explain how it extended their professional learning as a teacher. So they didn't fall away. It was an additional intervention. Kind of catch the ones who've fallen through the cracks, so to speak.
Could I just develop what Daniel just asked, which is to say, if there were kind of like perhaps there's a missing run-up to this, which is because you didn't feel you had time for it, which is that is there a sense in teacher education, and perhaps more widely in professional education, that critical reflection type work is being done in a way that is not actually valuable for generating sort of principled strategies to take forward into their working lives, and is sort of tending towards, say, at best, a bag of anecdotes and tricks and, experiences? Is that the reason that motivated the whole kind of, we need to get them out of this code, which is the prosaic code. We need them to move around a bit so that they're being able to get over the gravity well of a specific context and their own specific experiences. If nothing else, also to be able to hear other people's experiences and to be able to recontextualize those. Is that the kind of like the real world problem sort of motivating all of this?
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. So I argue in the paper that I've written in 2021 that when they are stuck in this kind of the context in which that they are thinking about or reflecting on, they're not generating insights for themselves to take into a new classroom context. So it's all very well to know and understand and get in their feelings about this lesson today, but how's that going to help them tomorrow? And when they are mentoring new teachers as well, because then that tends to lead to just tips and tricks without that principled knowledge that actually underpins the practice being mediated to students. And I think it perpetuates the theory practice divide quite severely. Thank you for that, Carl. That's going to be useful to remember for the chapter. So then we gave.
Oh God, yes. If you don't put that in, I will be just basically sending it back.
I'm sure you will send it back a few times.
Always start from a real world problem, I tell everybody. I mean, in this context, it's fine because this is it's all about context. This is the LCT roundtable. So sometimes, in order to try and get as much LCT in, you're don't put that stuff in. But I kind of think it's still, this is not a criticism. I'm just saying, I think it's really still worth saying what the motivating real world problem is, because I mean, as I'm finishing off this book that reminds me of sort of the introduction to LCT, it's ridiculous how many times I say it's the problem situation that matters, and that's everything that drives LCT and every study of LCT. So it's always worth, and then we know why something's not working or not. I think that's really because we've got a problem that we're trying to have a solution to. And then there's our guiding light. Because LCT is not about modeling the world. I know you take that for granted, but there's many people from many disciplines who do use LCT. And many of those disciplines and approaches that they've learned are about modeling something specific. And else it is not about trying to model something, it's just about trying to solve conjectures that solve problems. So we have to know what that problem is in order to be able to go, right, now we know we've done something valuable because it's kind of helping to solve that problem. As I said, that's me just using your thing as an excuse to make a point rather than a criticism of your work, because I know that it's
Thank you.
motivated by that.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Carl. So we gave them this semantic specialization plane with the translation devices built in. Of course, we're trying to make it as accessible as we can for the students. Let's not spend forever agonizing over them developing their own. It'll get lost, and the point will get lost. And so they could see these 16 positions were set up by the various strengths of epistemic relations and social relations. And actually, by now, they knew what the 4 codes meant. They'd learned that in their coursework. They knew them in general, but now we looked at what they meant for reflection, analyzing the data that is their own reflection. So they could see that in a knowledge code, they mention the knowledge and maybe even in depth, but they kind of describe it. In a NOAA code, they don't really talk about the knowledge or the concept so much, but more about their judgments, their feelings, discretions, and so on. Relativist, they kind of just describe general goings on in the classroom. And in the elite code, they bring that particular knowledge together with their thinking and feeling at the same time.
Can I ask a question just about
Yeah, Paul.
I mean, you've done this to help the students specifically, and so on the vertical ER, you're using different words to mean sort of the same thing of approaches go to procedures, go to protocols. Is there some specific meaning in that the students would get that a protocol is somehow more specific than a procedure
Mm,
than an approach? Or
mm,
I mean, are you using those specific words for very specific reasons that they would
mm,
understand?
mm. I mean, I think the thing for them is the word specific, broad, various, possible. That's kind of what you've got to remember that our student population, only about 5 to 7% are English home language speakers. For the rest, it's English is a second, third, fourth, fifth language. So we have to keep that language as simple as possible. So when we're not worrying about the nuance between procedure versus protocols. It's specific, bit broader, very broad, not
Yeah.
at all type of thing.
That's partly why I was asking, because I was just wondering if why not keep the same word? Why not just use approach, or
Yeah, that is an
well,
interesting
because it
question.
makes it more
That's
complicated in my head to change it, because you then start wondering, does it matter? And actually, as a computer scientist, those 3 words mean very specific different things
of course,
potentially.
yes.
So
And I
so
think
I'm
that's
kind of
what's so
coming at
nice
it from
about the
that
round
angle, but
table. Yeah, that's what's so nice about the round table is because so many different disciplines come together and can provide those insights that I wouldn't necessarily know that a reader might come with. So that's very helpful. Thank you, Paul. I might
yeah,
just
I mean,
invoke your help.
it just boiling down to it just feels like it would be easier for the students to follow if it was the same word used, if you don't really
Mm,
care about specific semantics of those words anyway. But anyway,
yeah,
I was just wondering whether there was a reason.
thanks, Paul. Um, And one thing that I just wanted to share was we had that usual problem of that Carl has mentioned before, students thinking elite is best because of the word elite, and they we must always go to the elites, and we were like, not necessarily, and we spent a lot of time saying not one code in itself is bad, but I'll show you a little bit more of that later.
Oh, I'm just on that. If I had a time machine and if I could change one name, one concept name, it would be Elite Code. It's way too late now, but it's just if I had one had a time machine, could go back. That was named well before I put in the protocols for naming that require them to have all sorts of pass all sorts of hurdles and so on. But yeah, that's a nightmare.
Yeah. So this year, I wanted to share this with you. Lee and I did something different. Okay. I thought I was going to die of nervousness. So to show our students first of all, how researchers code data, what we mean by this kind of inter-rater reliability, because they did work together with, on their own reflection, but kind of discussing how they would code it. And also that AI tends to create pretty bad reflections as a bit of a deterrent. We live in front of human live bodies, 750 of them in our lecture theatre, on the big screen, logged into ChatGPT and asked it to generate a reflection. And then we coded it live. We each had a microphone and we discussed, we argued with each other. And we argued why we thought each sentence, could be coded as a particular strength of epistemic relations or social relations. And I was very nervous that it wasn't going to go well. And it went so well. In fact, the students were getting involved, and I'd say, I think this is ER minus minus, and Lee would say, I don't know, I think it's ER minus, and they go, no, it's ER minus minus, because of, it was amazing. And in fact, we've written a short piece to be published as part of an international kind of combined piece on AI in education, on how this worked for us. So we modeled coding practice for the students this year. And this is what ChatGPT gave us. I'll go very quickly through this. As you can see, what it gave us was very, very, it didn't really draw on actual content at all. Very weak epistemic relations and very strong social relations, all very much up in the feelings. And what it did was it just reinforced this notion of a reflection as just, this is dear diary, this is how it went, and this is how it felt. I felt. And it was such a good example. Thank you, ChatGPT. You saved our bacon in this example. And then we showed them how so you'd code just epistemic relations first, then we code just social relations, then we bring them together to work out in which of the 16 positions of the specialization plane the sentences go. And then we showed them how to plot and discussed a lot of time with what it meant that this reflection is only in the Noah code. What is it missing? How could it be improved? Which was an amazing, amazing experience. And I did record it, and Teams deleted my recording, unfortunately. So it's just a memory now. So let me quickly show you what we've seen. So this is Kaya, who got 66% for the assignment. This is from this year, 2025. So it's an average mark. Kaya tends to be an average, getting in sort of the 60%. And as you can see, I haven't given you all of her sentences from her original reflection, but she plotted it on the specialization plane. And as you can see, her reflection focused a lot on describing the goings on, the topic. Today I'm teaching this. The learners had to cut and paste. Afterwards, I went back to my grade 3 class and did the Afrikaans spelling test because the Afrikaans teacher was very descriptive, and then focused really on, I'm just so exhausted. Okay, valid, that's okay. But very much descriptive and focusing on the feelings. She spends very little time in the knowledge code, doesn't go into the elite code either. And she told me that that was because she was teaching a lesson to the little children, and so their knowledge is not specific and specialized, which we had a big conversation about. That's why her reflection was there. Now, Kaya, in her essay on what the coding and the mapping of her reflection showed her, made these amazing insights. She said she was able to discern that her reflection was more descriptive than analytical, that it's honest on a personal level, but shallow on a professional one. I didn't critically examine what I taught, why I taught it, or how I could do better. And going forward, she said, I need to incorporate more teaching theory and knowledge into my writing if I want to increase the breadth and depth of my reflective practice. I think these are astounding insights that she was able to glean from this task. So after her revisions, they had to take exactly the same reflection. Sorry, Daniel, just 1 second, and rewrite it based on their insights. Yes, sorry, Daniel.
So I'm looking at the reflection. I'm looking at the original. I'm sorry, the reflection and the reflection on the reflection, and my sort of ChatGPT antennas went up from my own classroom experience. Do you think it's 100% that she wrote that second reflection, or do you know it? Was it done in class?
You mean the reflective, the analytical essay? Yeah. So we actually, in our small class tutorials, they drafted them in front of us. So I saw her drafts, and yes, okay, she wrote these. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and unfortunately, one we have to think about all the time. So in her revised reflection, this was the specialization plot. She, again, just started describing, this is what I taught. And that was fine. I said to them that you can't reflect on something you haven't told us what it is. You have to start by describing, and then you can move. And again, she didn't really go into the knowledge code, but there was far more movement around the plane and far less description. So although she spends quite a lot of time in the Noah code, she even peeks into the elite code a few times. So for example, here where she says, I formulated a task that required learners to cut and paste pictures of polluted areas into the appropriate category of pollution, in addition to encouraging learners to interact more actively with the content. It strengthened their visual learning and classification abilities. I selected it because it encourages involvement and supports life skills curriculum requirement. Okay, so that she's bringing her judgment, her intention to bear with curriculum, with teacher, the knowledge, the content knowledge. Okay, it's far more insight and depth in that reflection. So that's kind of an average student. What I found fascinating, though, with this intervention is that it didn't just help those whose reflections weren't great to make them good. It also helped the high flyers to make them better and to get more insight. So Alice is a high flyer. She is a distinctive student, always has been. And as you can see, her original reflection moved quite nicely around the plane. A little bit concentrated in the Noah code, but she moves far beyond a generic description of the lesson, okay? So her lesson was in history about European colonization of Africa. And, you know, she really does go into quite a lot of depth. Was in hearing them express what it felt like to be in the shoes of a colonizer or indigenous leader showed me they weren't just learning facts, they were developing empathy. You know, far more than descriptive at this stage already. Alice's analytical essay, she was able to then take it to the next level. She could see that weaker epistemic relations emerged, and that shifted her away from disciplinary knowledge and more towards her personal feelings, which takes a transition into the Noah code. And it was so hard to choose a quote or a section from her essay because it was all just so tight, and analyzing the moves and what they meant as she went through her analysis. So after the revisions, this is what Alice's specialization plan looked like. She had taken some of the concentration out of the Noah code. She was engaging far more with the knowledge of the lesson and quite a lot in the elite code. And I just love this, that she said, I'm just looking here. If you look at number 11, they spoke about the unfairness, the manipulation, the silenced African voices, and how deeply complex this process was. One boy even said, oh, this is why we have borders. Another said, this is why the Congolese speak French. This showed me that they did not only develop empathy, but they are able to see the effects of colonization on our continent today, really bringing her insights to bear on this particular content and her intentions to bear on this particular content.
Can I just say, look, can you go back one? What I just like about this is that, that we can use LCT for nice, simple stuff to do with seeing, patterns on planes and, for example, just movements around. But it's really nice to see that just how, it's quite complex, but you can see just how it's not about one code being good. Like sometimes people think, oh, just one code's great. It's like, if we go down into this granular level, which we don't have to, because you can use it at different levels, but if you want to get down into this granular level, you can, because you might want to just do a whole lesson. So actually it's dominated by particular code, or a mixture of codes. But it's really nice to see that there is that it isn't just, it's not like a typology. It's not like we just give it one label. You can say, it's moving around, or there's a sort of dispersal pattern of some kind, because you might have another one which has a very different dispersal pattern where it's all concentrated down in relativist code or something like that. So it's just useful to be able to see this sort of thing.
It is, and what it gave us was a language. And that's something we didn't have. Why is this problematic? Oh, because it's all sitting in the relativist and doesn't move. And my favorite thing was that when they coded in class together, in pairs and things like that, and what they were so ashamed of the original coding because they now had a tool and a language to be able to say, this is a problem, or this is, and
you don't want
I'd walk
shame,
around.
Dale.
I don't want them to feel shame, but so I'm walking around trying to help them, and they like kind of hiding, and I'm like, what's wrong? They're like, no, ma'am, the whole thing's in the relativist code. We don't even move out of, no, ma'am, this was so bad. And I just said, no. I'm so glad that you can see that. This is just fabulous. And now let's talk about how we're going to improve it. And I set up in my small class a bit of a courtroom where someone would bring their reflection and say, I've coded this like this. And we would, present your evidence for why you coded it like this. And then they would get cross-examined. I don't think it would be coded like that because the evidence suggests that it should be, and it was really quite a fun activity. And then I was the judge at the end of the day. And I decided who won the court case. So that was quite useful. But they really, because they had this language, no, this is very weak epistemic relations because I talk about this and this and this. They couldn't do that before.
Dale, can I just ask, just
Hi,
picking up
Steve.
on Carl's comments a little bit. So it's true that, I mean, I love this. This is fabulous, and you really get the sense of how the students are moving across the plane and so on. How does that then relate to the marking criteria? Because there must be some things that are valorized and some things that are not in terms of getting a higher grade. So once students had this shared language, so you've been talking a lot about moving out of the relativist quadrant, for example. So was that a key criterion, for example? And if shifting was a key criterion, are you allowed, is it valorized to shift in and out of the relativist code, or should students be staying out of the relativist code? Or and it seemed like as you were talking over the last two examples, you were sort of valorizing in your analysis movement towards, at least implicitly, movement towards the elite code. So was that given explicitly also as a criterion in terms of what would get students a better grade, or what led to better learning or more transferable learning, or however you were framing it?
So that's a really good question. Thanks, Steve. And I would have loved to include it if time had allowed. So the marking criteria had nothing to do with where they moved on the plane at all. We were not assessing their actual reflections. We were assessing how they drew insights and elaborated those insights and were able to implement the insights. So their reflections are assessed under the teaching practice course. This was, can they code them accurately and plot them accurately? Can they draw valid insights from that coding and plotting? And can they implement the insights? But not, is their reflection good or bad? It was to do with the process more than the product, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
I hope that answers the question. Thanks, Steve. So let's let the numbers do the talking as we wrap up. In 2022, when students only had a semantics intervention, great uptake, significantly improved uptake because of 66%. I've said this before, with the revised reflection of prompts. In 2023, we saw 93% of the students taking up the semantics and specialization revisions together, the revised reflection prompts and passing the specialization analysis research project. 2024, 91%. In 2025, when we did this modeling of how to code, we had a 98% uptake. And just to put everyone's minds at ease, our marking criteria and rubrics are very, very rigorous. In fact, we don't award a percentage mark that ends in anything but a 3 or an 8. So we don't squabble between, is this a 64 or 62? If it's a low 60, they get 63. If it's a high 60, it's 68. And this has been proven through research on assessment practice that I'm sure a lot of you would be aware of. So there was a lot of agreement between markers and standardization across markers as well. And so these numbers are astounding. They really are. And I've put a dotted line to say we're keeping on going with this. And hopefully we can reach full adoption of the intervention. So with that said, I'd like to thank you. Here's some of my references, and I have to acknowledge my co-authors, Ray the cat and Greg the dog, that ate my glasses 2 weeks ago.
Thank you, Dale. The silent clap of Zoom coming your way. Always the weirdest
Thank
thing.
you.
Thomas had a question to say, oh, and by the way, there's actually, for people who don't realize, there's actually a web page on the website, the LCT website, called Animals of LCT. I think you can go and have a look. They've got pictures of lots of pets with LCT books for no reason at all. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
Thomas.
I don't pose my pets. They just lie and chill with the LCT books, literally.
Well, LCT books have been well known to help animals relax, and but also to improve the texture and glow of your skin and your all-round demeanor, as well as your vitamin uptake. All of these things
Yes.
come from learning LCT. Now, Thomas
Red
had a
nose.
question.
Sorry, Carl.
Yeah.
Sorry, Carl. I can ask my own question.
Oh,
I
you
just
can
don't
ask
have
your own
all-
question, Thomas. Okay, go for it.
I don't.
Good.
I just don't
Great.
have video. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Excellent talk. I just wrote it. I'm just going to read what I wrote in the chat. I'm curious about your revised reflection questions. You said that your students are primarily not English home language users, but the revised reflection questions are markedly more complex in terms of syntax and a bit lighter and denser semantically than the initial questions. And I'm curious, what challenges did you find with the questions, and how have you managed, for lack of a better word, to simplify them? And I'm asking because I'm in Japan and I use reflection questions in EFL training courses, and I'm found similar problems. And I'm thinking about similar interventions, either using L2 English or using L1 Japanese. Since it's an EFL class, I would prefer to use L2 English, but I'm wondering if this is mere, whereas the L1 would be better. So I'm curious what you have to say, and thank you again for your talk.
Thanks, Thomas. That's a really good question. And I'm going to start this with a caveat to say that research and those questions were developed before my time by Lee and Elizabeth. But being someone who teaches on the course now, we do a lot of work unpacking what it means. But what's really great, Thomas, is we teach them semantics in their very first year of study. We primarily focus on semantic waves to help them plan lesson pathways and unit pathways and so on. So we draw on that to help them to understand what we mean by those reflection prompts. And we actually show them, right, this reflection prompt wants you to move from the top of the semantic wave down to the bottom of the semantic wave. What would that look like? And so on and so on. So we build it conceptually to simplify the language. And I think we've had that's been relatively successful. But yes, the students already have the language, the conceptual language for us to do that, if that helps.
Laura has
Is that okay, Thomas?
Oh, Thomas, are you happy with that?
Yes and no. I guess I'm wondering, I get how the students would have a better grasp on the concepts. And I'd be in a situation where, because my entire program does not teach LCT, alas, yet, I would have to be bootstrapping all this from the get-go, and that might be a little bit difficult. But I guess I'm wondering, so you're saying that because of that, the syntactic challenges, for instance, were not such a challenge?
I'm not saying they weren't a challenge. I think we have the conceptual tools to not simplify the language, but simplify the task, if that makes sense. So show them how to do it instead of understanding the words necessarily. With that being said, I've never experienced a student saying to me, I don't know what these words mean. So yes, but I think that is something to think about, because they are far more complex questions with clauses and things like that. So I think that's something that you've given me something to think about this afternoon and for the days to come. Thank you, Thomas. Definitely gonna
Well, again,
let's chat about
thank you very
it.
much for the talk, and it's been very inspiring, and I will be working with this and looking at your work for further inspiration. So thank you again.
Thanks, Thomas. Penny, I think you're next.
Thank you, Jael.
Hi, Penny.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
That was great. You argued very powerfully for the value of the research task, the students' own research on their writing. I just wanted to go back to the question Daniel sort of started, which was, and why? Why would they want to do this? And between with the high performing student, the improvement that she made was more literature or literature and policy, just in the tiny examples that we
Yes. Yes.
the thought, what I was wondering about was your thoughts on when you were very excited by the essay that the less excellent student was provided, but the key improvement in her reflection was how she would apply, or they would apply that in the future. So it's sort of, I was just wondering, you would probably have thought about this as far as where does that future student live on the plane? It isn't a real thing. Sorry, Carl, can you help? It isn't a real specific current existing identity that we're talking about. It's their projection of what they would do differently next time, which is closely related to the value of the task for them. Why would they do this? So they can do better next time. And it's, for me, it's the key thing that improved was them saying, this is what I would do next time. That was why their reflection was better than their simple description of their experience. And I just wondered about coding the future.
If we switched from the specialization plane back to the semantics plane, would it be pointing towards the worldly code, towards the bottom right, of taking sort of that arc from sort of real world context, simplistic understanding through basic understanding to theory, and then how that might be brought back into practice? I wonder whether it might be pointing towards that bottom right in semantics. If we were to, yeah.
I think you're absolutely right, Steve. That's a very, very nice way of explaining it. So, Penny, if I'm understanding you correctly, the so what, for the future is enabling them to kind of reflexively think about their practice, whether looking back as a reflection or planning a lesson, planning an intervention of their own, whatever it is, making that pedagogical reasoning explicit at this point and rigorous at this point, that teaching is not arbitrary, that it's not just based on a whim or a personality type, that it's based on solid foundations, principles, ideas, theories. Okay, so that thinking becomes kind of tacit as they grow. Am I answering your question?
I've certainly understood that from what you were showing us. It's just, I'm just wanting to observe that Kaya's reflection in saying, and next time I would do this instead. If, like as Steve was saying, that might code it right back to a very specific, a very context grounded place. And that would be a good thing. The students should recognize that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of, that would be a good purpose for them to take away from the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Helen?
Thanks, Penny.
Hi. Thank you for that. That was really brilliant, and I recognise that that what you've done with the analysis is kind of add depth to the students' understanding of themselves and their practice, but also their writing, I think, as well. But you said that they had 98% uptake when what you did with ChatGPT was modelled. I'm interested to know whether you did any other modelling, or looked at exemplars or anything like that, because where this question comes from is whether it is a conceptual understanding of, of reflection, or whether actually it's how that conceptual understanding materializes in practice. So, if the students are having to evaluate, that they think that they've done that, and then their grade comes back and they realize that they haven't. But actually, if they were shown what that evaluation or future planning looked like in exemplars or models in different ways, whether actually that would resolve an issue without this analysis. Not saying that the analysis is bad, because I think it adds depth, but I'm interested to know, in that kind of, that modeling, you had the largest uptake there.
So in previous years, yes, we went through examples, and we, in class and as well as in the big class. So how it works is we've got big class lectures with all 750, and then we break into smaller, sort of 40, 45 in a class. And we worked at both levels with examples of before and after, and how would we improve this? What's the problem? What are they doing well? What are they, but this was, I think, the thing with the modeling was it actually showed them the process of coding, and when you can't decide on which code to use, how do you think through that and make a decision, and oh, but if you're going to code this one as stronger, why are you coding that one as weaker? Because both do this, that, so I think it was more the coding that helped them. Because conceptually, most of them had it down in previous years. I think it was just that actual coding, and then they weren't sure about themselves and that kind of thing. So,
do you
as you
think
could see, the uptake was still good without the modeling.
Yeah.
I just really think that kind of just kicked it.
It kind of put it in dialogue as well, I suppose, and that's always a good thing.
And I think, there's something to be said about making it engaging, and like, this isn't a boring thing. Two of my lecturers are standing in front of me having a stand-up fight about codes, and I think we laid it on quite thick, like, no, absolutely, why would that be stronger if this is, or Lee would say, I think it's this, and I'd go into the microphone, why? And they thought that was hilarious, so I think it was also like, it made this, it's not this kind of dry thing. It's an active process. I can argue, I can think, I think there was value in that as well.
Cool, nice one, thank you.
I like the modeling of argument, because there's so much analysis is, or should be, done in pencil effectively, like yes. Metaphorically, which is I've often used whiteboards for PhD student analysis, because I'll start on a plane going, I reckon it's somewhere here, and do the entire plane, and then try and figure out, like, I don't know where it is yet, and it might be just one whole area, and then we argue back and forward. It takes a lot of discussion and like trying to hone down as to where something is. Sometimes you start like going, I know it's in Europe, and then you have to kind of like try and, or it's in Africa, it's like the equivalent of that, and then you try and get down to the specific place it might be and what code it might be, and just start
That's
very
exactly
loose and just sort of arguing back and forward. It's really helpful. I've got like one more question. So, oh, by the way, just thank you for that, Helen, as well, because I really miss hearing English accents.
It's
like, oh, delight! I love that.
Just to make it even more just to make it even more British, I turned my camera off then to have a crumpet. So
Oh, I would die if I saw a crumpet and wasn't able to have one. I've been here 20 years, and it's one of the most multicultural countries in the world, Australia, but it means I rarely come across English accents, so I actually quite miss them. The sound of home. Dorian, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. Absolutely fascinating.
Sorry.
I'm not gonna try an English accent, Carl. I was just wondering, you took us through an average student and you took us through a strong student, but what happened to the weaker student?
In, like those who failed.
Yeah.
So I went through the student. I mean, there's 750 of them. It took me a while, but only 2% failed. I think I can't even remember the number. And the reason they failed, either they clearly used ChatGPT or AI, as in one of them spelled Maton incorrectly, and it brought up some revised
Sorry,
Bloom's
hang on.
taxonomy
Misspelling my name is an
situation.
automatic fail. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the disrespect for a start. And so they spoke about somebody else's thing about, and I'm like, okay, great. First of all, you weren't in lecture. Or they didn't complete the task, like they didn't plot, they left a whole section of the task, of the assignment out, and that's why they failed. So actually everybody who did the task pretty much could do it somewhat successfully, which was great.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.